This is Ann Davis, and today is March the 7th of 2022, and I am honored to be here today with my good friend Joe Guy. And Joe, I've enjoyed watching you through the years and seeing how you've grown from, I guess, you were maybe early 20s or early 30s when I got to know you through the
Probably,
years.
yeah.
And it's just been a joy to see how you've developed your career, your life, and what you've meant to this community. And I'm honored to be sitting here today interviewing you, and thank you for your time.
Well, you're too kind. You're a good friend, and I appreciate you saying that.
Joe's had a varied career, and it always geared towards the betterment of humanity, the protection of people, and I think that's been a cornerstone, I think, of your life. And I wanted to find out, just to begin with, about your childhood and what shaped you into the man you are today, Joe. What did your parents teach you? How were you raised?
Yeah, I would definitely say I've always had good parents. They have my mom and dad. Both were from this area, both from McMinn County. And Dad actually graduated. He was the final graduating class in Etowah High School, and Mom was the first graduating class at Central High School. So they grew up in the 50s and 60s, and Dad was in the military during Vietnam. I wasn't actually born here because he was in the military at the time, and so that he was stationed up in Champaign, Illinois, and I was born up there. But we wound up moving back to Etowah in the early 70s, and then my mother's father, my grandfather, Kenneth Morgan, still owned a piece of the original Burger property on Burger Branch that had been in my grandmother's family since 1830. And so that's where I grew up for the most part. But Mom and Dad, they were lucky. They had good parents, and they passed a lot of values on to me. I had one law enforcement family and one farming family. And my grandfather, Winston Guy, was assistant chief of police in Etowah for many, many years. And of course, my Uncle David was an officer in Etowah and Athens, and then wound up being an arson investigator and then a TBI agent. Dad worked a little in law enforcement for the city of Athens and for the sheriff's office back in the 80s when I was in high school. And so it's sort of like the family business. And so I was, I guess, a third-generation officer when I wound up getting into the line of work. My first law enforcement job was for the UT Police Department, doing nothing more than driving escort vans for the department. But it was kind of neat to do that and kind of start following in their footsteps. My other grandfather, Kenneth, that owned the farm where I grew up, I think that there was just a lot of just very fundamental, just good morals and hard work and things like that he kind of instilled in me. I was very close to both of my grandfathers and through my parents, and so both of them I think had an effect on me.
Now, Joe, after the UT Police Department, did you go? The next step was in continued law enforcement, and you were with the sheriff's department, weren't you, at that time? Is that correct?
I got there eventually.
Okay.
So I was just kind of working some odd jobs in college. I bounced around from a couple of different colleges. Most people that go to school as long as I did are doctors, but I didn't follow that path.
Well, we're glad you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it worked out okay. But I came back home and wound up working for the Etowah Police Department as a patrol officer and the Englewood Police Department around the same times. And in 1994, after about 2 or 3 years of law enforcement, I apologize, all my birthday notifications are coming through.
Is this your birthday?
No, it's my Facebook.
Okay.
Just let me know it's everybody else's birthday. And I went to school and got my EMT license also. So I was working as an EMT and as a law enforcement officer. And then in '94, I went to work for Sheriff George Rogers and worked the last almost the whole year of his last term. And then when Steve Frisbee was elected that year, several of us were retained, and so I spent several more years at the sheriff's office.
And then when you left the sheriff's office, that was when you became John Gentry's assistant.
I left briefly. You know, you don't make a lot of money in law enforcement, and Stephanie had some problems with pregnancy, and we'd kind of gotten into debt and some things like that. So I went into industry for a little while. I actually worked at J.M. Huber for about a year and a half. But I just always felt that need to go back, and I really enjoyed working in law enforcement and just working with people. I just really love people. How they respond to things. I think people in general are very encouraging and inspiring. And so when the opportunity to go to work for John came up, and that he approached me after I'd written a little bit, and he needed somebody with some of those skills to work in the mayor's office. And that was really probably a watershed moment in my career, because John and I had gone to high school together and knew each other our whole lives, and he offered me a very unique opportunity. Not very many folks get to do that. As he said when he pitched the idea to be his assistants, he said, "Your knowledge will be a mile wide and about that thick, because you'll have to know something about everything." And I'm kind of an eclectic kind of guy anyway, so I like to know a little bit about everything, and so that kind of suited me. But it was a great opportunity, and John's been a huge mentor in my career too. And again, just like my grandfathers, my parents, John is just a wonderful human being and sets a great example for what an elected official is supposed to be and what a public servant is supposed to be. And so I learned a lot from working for John.
Well, he certainly has set a wonderful example, and you followed it very well too. And but after serving under John for how many years?
8 years.
8 years.
For 2 terms.
Then you ran for sheriff.
Yeah, I've been approached about it a long way back when, and I was just very, very blessed with a lot of support. It was a difficult election because I had worked for Steve, and Steve had been very good to me, but it was something I felt like I could contribute something to the community, and I was blessed with a lot of support and trusted, I guess, with the job. So been there ever since 2010.
Okay, so yeah, that's a long time, and I
slipped
hope you'll
by.
be there another
Well,
10 or 15 years, Joe. And I know there's a lot of other people who feel the same way. What's some of the memories that you could share with us that are not private in your tenure as sheriff? Got a favorite story or?
There's a lot. I don't know.
I know with Larry Wallace, when we interviewed him, he had 2 or 3 very unusual things that had happened to him, as you can imagine. So,
I always liked the role of an officer. Really, they say you're either a hunter or a helper, and sometimes you'll find guys who are purely in that hunter mentality, and they just want to go out and enforce the law and arrest people, and that's what they like. And then you have some that all they want to do is just kind of ride around and just be kind to people and not really put a lot of people in jail. And I've tried to walk the center of that path, and because I've known really good officers that were on both sides of that coin, and I think that if you can combine the two and you can be aggressive when you need to be as an officer, as a sheriff, but at the same time, always sort of be sensitive to what's going on with the people and why people are in the situations that they're in. I know as an officer a long time ago, I went to serve a warrant one night, and the guy that I was looking for wasn't there, but as we would do, we would ask permission to go in and search. And so I knew the girl. I went to high school with her, and she had fallen on some bad times and made some bad decisions. But I got permission to search her trailer for the the person we were looking for. It was in the middle of the night. It was in December, and as I was going through her trailer, I kept coming up on these bedrooms with these little boys sleeping in these bedrooms. And it was cold. It was wintertime, and they didn't have a blanket or a sheet or anything, and they were just all literally piled up on each other. There would be 2 or 3 in each bed, and some were, I think, her kids, and some were just maybe some of her nephews. And I could tell she just really wasn't there like she should be. They didn't have a thing, and that, of course, I was going to go home that night to my Christmas tree and my young family, and with presents and everything piled up everywhere for just the way I'd grown up. And I went and put some things together for them and went back to take it to them, but I think that had scared her for me to come in and search them, so they had left. And we were able to eventually find her and get those items to her just for those kids for Christmas. But that always kind of stuck with me, that not everybody had some of the opportunities that I did. Not that we were about that close to being poor ourselves, or not very well off. But there was just a lot of examples of hard work and things like that. But always taking care of other people, and that was just something my parents did, something my grandparents did. I think that just kind of moved me to try to follow along that same line of taking care of people.
Joe, I think one of the things, and I know for years, there's, and I hadn't even planned to ask you this, but it just popped into my head. There has been, East Tennessee has been a hub of drug problems. And after you became sheriff, we've noticed a significant difference in the decrease of a lot of that drug activity. And I know you work in collaboration with the city as well, and with the state, and it's a huge network of things that have to happen to make all of this work well. But have you got any thoughts on how you've made a difference in that area? Have any techniques that maybe you've used that would be significant in what you've been able to accomplish?
Well, I don't know that it's me necessarily, but first of all, we just live in a really good community. We do have issues here. Tennessee, this statewide, we have, and when you just look at opioids, for example, we have around 5 or 6 million prescriptions in our state. Well, that's how many people live in Tennessee. About 6 million people. So we've got a prescription for every man, woman, and child in Tennessee. We unfortunately like to take our pills. So we have that culture just as part of where we live. Of course, there's other poverty and other issues that come into play as well. But we do have, I think McMinn County especially is a very unique place. And you know how there's just a spirit of working together here. And so what I've just tried to do is just bring people together and bring our employees up to par. What our strategy was this. I guess this is kind of what you're asking. And it goes back to kind of being the hunter and the helper. I felt like that we needed to be aggressive. There's no question. You've got to be aggressive on narcotics crimes, drug-related crimes. But there has to be an awareness aspect of that too. You've got to put the tools out there to help people make decisions for the future. And so we kind of did that. That was our goal, and we didn't know if it would work. But we tried to do that and be aggressive, and part of that aggressiveness was just training our staff to bring them up to speed. And one simple thing we did was to train every uniformed officer as a detective, give them basic investigative training. Because here's the thing about drugs: every crime is somehow related to narcotics or narcotics trafficking or narcotics or drug and alcohol abuse. And you could just about name anything from child abuse, sexual abuse, certainly theft, there's so many things that either are directly tied to that or have some connection to drugs, just to use that term. So believing that, we felt like if we'll focus on the drug problem and see if we can make a difference in these other issues. And that seemed to work. Our number of reported crimes, like you say, it's about 50% less than what it used to be. Now that's for the sheriff's office, for what we see out in the county. We still have drug issues, we still have theft issues. They go sort of up and down. Some years they're very low, but those, as far as just looking at everything that's reported, those are the things that tend to pop up. But we have very few crimes against persons as compared to a lot of other places. So we trained our staff, we brought them up to par, we implemented some things, and I guess that this goes back to just the way I was raised. I really believe in principled management, principled leadership, and so we came up with this, my chief deputy, Matt Blair, and I came up with the badge is actually designed to represent our mission statement. And each point of the badge represents something about our mission statement. Like the badge, the point that points upward is the always striving for excellence. The point that points towards your heart is the service that you, or the pride that you feel for the service you render. The point that points away from you is the service you render to the public. And then those two on the bottom would be our integrity and our loyalty. Well, the guys wear that every day. And so we sort of play a little game with them. Hey, what does that top point of your badge mean? And they've got to tell us that. If they don't, they have to buy me lunch. So we try to instill that kind of culture where we really do have some guiding principles that they fall back on, kind of a touchstone in everything that they do. And when all this unrest and stuff happened over the past couple of years, I feel like we were sort of ahead of that.
Prepared.
We were, and a lot of the things that they were requiring law enforcement agencies to adopt, as far as some accountability in our policies, we already had that. And so I think that we were already ahead of a lot of those issues. But I think that most people in this line of work really do try to do the right thing at every opportunity they can. We've just taken some licks because of some bad decisions that people have made different places in the country. But we got a good community, and I've always tried to have that reflection in the sheriff's office of how good the community is.
Joe, one of the things that I think that makes your job so much harder is the proximity of McMinn County. We are right in the corridor of I-75. Here's I-40 coming in. I mean, and there's not a lot of cities that have all of this drugs north and south on this corridor like we do. And I know, I guess that's why East Tennessee has had such a hard time controlling the issue.
We're very much like West Virginia in that respect. We're at a crossroads, so to speak, like you say. But it's always been that way. I mean, your grandfather was a chief deputy and was a law enforcement officer, and they dealt with alcohol, I think, mostly back then.
Bootlegging.
Yeah. We missed those days. That was so much easier. We just thought that was a problem. And I'm sure they dealt with some other things as well, but for the most part, it's probably a lot of bootlegging. But they followed those same corridors, and our north and south highways didn't have interstates, I guess, back then, but it was those same highways being used to transport those illicit substances, whatever they were. And there's money to be made. There's addictive natures to all those things. And if there's a need, unfortunately, people are going to produce those items for people to use. And it's nothing new. It's just a different slant on an old problem. Yeah.
Well, Joe, this is fascinating. I could stay here all day long and ask you sheriff questions, but you've done so much more with your life, too. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your writing ability. You've been a best-selling author here for a while.
I don't know about best-selling.
Well, in this area, anyway, we'll claim you for this area.
Okay.
How's that?
Okay.
And how many books have you written thus far?
To date, 8.
8.
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess the thing that has impressed me the most is you've been able to find hidden history from the Cherokee Indians through the Civil War, through traditions, culture. You've hit on just about everything. And I love the book you did on postcards from Don Reed's collection. I think it's just a really special edition. But what would be your favorite book of all of them that you've written?
Oh my goodness, that'd be tough.
What?
That's like saying who's your favorite child.
Well, okay, I'm not going to ask you that. I know you love all your kids the same.
It's
Yeah.
tough. I think probably the first one is, it required the most research, and where I've written these very small stories about some hidden history type things. That first book about Fort Loudon took me about 5 or 6 years of going back and forth and kind of being familiar with the story and then doing all the research. And I just don't think there's anything like that first book. And I was very, very fortunate to get that picked up by a traditional publisher, and for it to do as well as it's done. But I don't know. I see stories sometimes in events that have transpired in our past. And it goes back to people. It always intrigues me how people respond to things that happen. It's not so much the fights or the battles or whatever. It's what did those people do that were involved in.
Now, you first started writing when Beyond the Blue Line, wasn't that the name of the column that you wrote for the DPA?
It was.
And that was your first writing attempt?
And that started off very therapeutic.
Oh, okay.
So I had been, let me back up a little. When I was at the police academy, one of our instructors actually, Randy Tedford, was a sergeant at the Oak Ridge Police Department, and he taught several classes to our police academy class, but one of them was report writing. But Randy wrote a newspaper article for the Oak Ridger. I think that's a newspaper up there. And I never heard of that. And he would come in, actually even wrote an article about our class and just something funny about that our class had done when he was over there. And then I started reading David Hunter, the writer from Knoxville that was a Knox County Sheriff's deputy, and sort of read in those areas a little bit. And then when I got into police work, you do really see some things that nobody else gets to see. Somebody's described it as, most people, if society is a skyscraper, most of us move on that elevator between 2 or 3 floors as we move around, take our kids to school, go shopping, whatever. But when you work in law enforcement, you literally go from the basement to the top floor. And sometimes you literally go from the poorest home in the county to the richest home in the county within a half an hour, working different kinds of calls. So you really do see everything in your bailiwick or your county or your city. So that had always sort of intrigued me to look for those stories and write those down. But what motivated me the most, like I said, I was an EMT. I still maintain my license. But our dispatchers knew that I was an EMT. And so when medical calls came out, especially at night and an ambulance wasn't close, the dispatchers would check and see if I had my supplies with me, and they'd send me to those calls. We had a 4-year-old one night that just went unresponsive, and I happened to be close. So I went to this call, and this little girl she was eating soup and just literally fell over on the floor with no warning at all. And so when you're in those situations, you just feel like the loneliest person in the world, because I did CPR on her. I did everything I knew to do with her family there, and never did get her back, and took her to the hospital and everything. But it turned out she had her appendix had ruptured, and nobody knew it. And so it's very traumatic on the family. And of course, when you're, unfortunately, I'll have to say, through my whole career, I've never done CPR on anybody individually except children. I don't know why it happens that way, but and that's tough enough. But my son, my oldest son, Brady, was about that little girl's age. And I had a little PTSD from that. When Brady would come up and run up and grab me around the legs, I would look down and literally see that little girl's face in his face. And so it was really bothering me, and I could tell I was just sort of carrying that with me, as you do, because of the things you see and do. But so what I did was sit down and wrote that story out in the third person. That, you know, the officer responded, the officer did this, the officer did that, and those images kind of went away. And so, I noticed that just about myself. I was able to kind of work through that, and so I started writing things that I had either heard about other officers, stories they told me they were involved in, or things that I was involved in. And I just took a chance and sent about 5 of them to Doug Hedrick at the DPA and said, I'm sure he got stuff like that all the time. I thought, well, here's some other knucklehead that thinks he wants to write for the newspaper. And then one day, one of the reporters showed up and said, I need to take your picture. You're going to be the new columnist. Yeah, just like that. So, but that gave me a reason to literally have a deadline every week or every month. And that gave me a lot of exposure, and it actually, I don't know if you know this or not, it actually turned into a little bit of a syndicated column. It went into newspapers all over. I guess nobody else was just writing those things. And it gave me an opportunity to sort of hone my storytelling, and every now and then I'd have to do some research, because really history was what really, really interested me. But I had all of these stories at my fingertips just from my career that I was able to write about, and people seemed to enjoy that. And I think I know it certainly helped develop me personally, but also develop a good relationship with the public, because a lot of people would tell me later those stories made me look at law enforcement officers in a much more human way. When you write about things that bothered you, or you wrote about things that were tough to deal with, or you weren't out there throwing everybody in jail. And some of those stories were about taking people to jail, but it was just a much more personal aspect of it. And I think that certainly probably helped me later on in my career. But that's kind of how all that got started.
Well, Joe, I don't know how you have time to do all that you do.
Well, I don't do any of it well. I just do a
no,
lot of it.
You do. And serve as county historian as well. And how many years has that been that you've been doing that?
I think since 2004, Bill Akins asked me to assume that role. And I think that interest really came from living on the farm, because I don't know why, but our particular little piece of property in that little valley, from the time of my grandparents and my mother's time, was covered up in artifacts. And so that, when I would go out there and you'd find spear points and nut stones and things out there, I think I always sort of felt a connection to wondering who did that belong to, or who sat around a fire 1,000 years ago and napped that tool out. And I always think about those people when I hold those things, that who literally they made those with their hands and had to survive, to live. And so I think that got me interested in history, and then just hearing the stories that my grandparents would tell me that from their childhood and things that their grandparents had passed on to them. I know probably some of my cousins thought those things were boring, but I would always sit there and just listen and soak all that stuff in, and a lot of that still comes out, I think, in some of the stories I write about. But yeah, Bill Akins came and asked me. I'd started the hidden history columns at that point when I went to work for John, and they seemed to do well, and he asked me to assume that role as a county historian, which is kind of a neat thing. There's only 95 of us, so trying to keep the county history out there in front of everybody, and do what I'm supposed to be doing as a
Well,
historian.
it was certainly helpful to me. in my role here at the museum, I've always enjoyed your columns. And
Well,
your
you've always
books
been
and,
a good friend, though. You've
so-
shared everything that you've got with me.
So-
So, you know, we've worked really well together. over the years.
Absolutely. And I'm going to embarrass you here just
Oh.
a minute. And I know you don't like talking about yourself. And I know you don't brag. That's just contrary to your nature. I know you that well, Joe. But I want you to tell me about your wonderful family. Beautiful wife, great children. And how you found the time to be the kind of husband and father you are. With all that's on your plate, I really admire that. And tell me a little bit about your family. And brag now.
I can brag on them, like I'm not
Okay.
bragging on myself. So when you're married to Stephanie Powers, you don't have a choice. You're going to be a good husband one way or the other, and you're going to be a good father. You know, we knew each other in high school, but we started dating in college, and she's just the best. She's we've been each other's support in whatever we've done career-wise or just having fun our whole marriage. And she looks at so much of life the way that I do, and vice versa. And she's walked through a lot of cemeteries and stuff with me to write. She's taken most of the pictures for the books when photographs need to be taken. She's had a wonderful career in mental health locally, and so we've always we've dealt with a lot of the same people and the same issues in our community, and she has really inspired me because she's always trying to help somebody, and whether it was working as a crisis specialist with the crisis team locally, or now she's the criminal justice liaison for our court system and throughout the district. And she's always talking to somebody or trying to find some resource for somebody. But that's the kind of mom she was too for our boys. Just always, they were the number one thing, and not that I ever wouldn't have thought that, but she made sure that whatever they were doing was the most important thing. And it's probably why it took so long to write that first book, because we were playing ball and taking kids camping and things like that. So they've always been the first thing. But I think, though, you have to prioritize, as you know, you prioritize things in life, or else everything else really doesn't have any value. So yeah, they've been. I've been very, very blessed with a good family, great family.
Well, Joe, this has just been one of the best interviews I can ever remember doing, and I've enjoyed it, and I've even learned some new things about you. Do you mind if I end with my favorite Joe Guy story?
Oh, I'm afraid to ask.
Joe's always supported this museum, and just in so many, many ways. And back, I don't know how many years ago it was, we were doing a program on Cherokee Indians. And I asked Joe if he would take part in that, and he says, well, sure. He's always been there to support us, no matter what I was getting him into, and he was willing to do it.
I will dress up for any good cause.
Well, you did. And Joe walked in the door dressed as Dragon Canoe.
Yeah.
And I have never in my life seen such expressions on children's faces. It was just one of the biggest treats of my life to be able to bring history to life for those young kids. And but you had your face painted white, and there was a feather back here, and it was just amazing to see the transformation. In fact, when you came through the door, I didn't know who you were at first. So anyway, but we've had a lot of fun, and I just thank you for the time you've given to this museum to help educate many, many people. And Joe, it was just an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time, and we'll think of some more stories someday, and maybe I'll get to interview you again.
That'd be fun.
Okay. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.